Well, shifting focus for you now, the world changed in many ways on September 11, 2001. Then President George W. Bush began the so-called War on Terror.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
It was a campaign that some critics argue created an age of fear and given rise to Islamist extremism, the likes of which the world had never known. It was a war that cast its net so wide, some people like David Hicks have become inextricably tangled in it. In 1999, David Hicks went in search of adventure on the Silk Road and instead learned of a nation's struggle for independence, intending, he says, to help the people of Kashmir. He found himself embroiled in a political situation that was far bigger than him. In 2001, David was captured at a taxi stand in Afghanistan while trying, he says, to get home. And he was sold to US forces, branded a terrorist. He then spent the next 5.5 years being tortured and abused in America's most notorious prison, Guantanamo Bay. With no trial or evidence linking him to a terrorist group, David pleaded guilty while maintaining his innocence. And back home, the Australian government were actively seeking his conviction.
We put a lot of pressure on the Americans to accelerate the charges being brought against David Hicks. David Hicks did plead guilty.
David Hicks says he was subjected to CIA-sanctioned and direct torture. This month saw the long-delayed and hard-fought release of a 528-page CIA torture report. It forced Americans to examine the legacy of state-sanctioned brutality.
And while European countries have gone some way to addressing their involvement in the US torture program, Australia continues to deny its accountability. And this morning we're joined now by David Hicks and human rights and social justice advocate Dr. Aloysia Brooks. Thanks for being here, both of you. Aloysia, we'll start with you. David's decision to go and train alongside Kashmiri independence group has invited his critics. We all know that. A lot of them have already written to this program this morning. Some of them are saying that he got what he deserved. Did the punishment fit the crime?
Well, firstly, there was no crime, and even the Howard government admitted that. So we've got
under Australian law. Yes.
Yes. So we've gotten documents that confirm the fact that David actually didn't commit an offence. And that they had to, in the end, make up a charge to charge David with. What we have to remember is that of the 136 men who remain in Guantanamo, most of them weren't caught on the battlefield, which is what is usually claimed. They were actually sold for a bounty to US forces. So we have a lot of people who were caught up in the process and who are now still in Guantanamo Bay 13 years later. You know, it's really, really important to reflect on the fact that torture is a crime under international law. You know, it's absolutely prohibited in every circumstance. There is absolutely no exception to that rule. So when we talk about torture, we have to remember that Australia signed the Convention Against Torture, and that was done for a reason, because we wanted to raise the bar and also join together as an international community to say that torture is never justified.
All right, David, let's talk briefly about some of the torture that you were subjected to there.
Well, apart from sensory deprivation, isolation, years of isolation, and incommunicado, there were beatings, there were interrogations at gunpoint, there was sexual assault, there was medical experimentation. There were purpose-built rooms that we called the torture chambers. They consisted of 4 main ingredients. That was light manipulation, noise manipulation, temperature manipulation, and stress positions.
What's that done to you now, David? What's been the lasting effect of that?
Well, there's been many lasting effects, physical, as well as psychological. It's done quite a lot to interfere negatively with my life, and that has an impact on those around me as well.
Aloysia, there's been some suggestion in the last couple of weeks, certainly in the media, that the US and the UK use David as something of a political football. What are you reading into that?
Yes, so I obtained some US State Department cables under Freedom of Information laws, and what they clearly showed was, one, the Australian government knew that David had not committed a crime, but it also pointed to the fact that Howard had asked, personally, Dick Cheney to charge David with something before he called the federal election. Now, there are serious questions that need to be asked about that. Here is a head of state asking another head of state to charge an Australian citizen with an offence for political purposes. So there are serious questions around this.
One of the reasons why you're both talking to us today is on the back of the CIA torture report, which has just been released. How does that torture report directly relate to David? Either of you, Aloysia, David, either of you can answer.
Well, the first thing I want to say about that report is that it's just a summary, and the Obama administration gave the CIA a blackout pen to redact the report. So what we're seeing is a summary of the main report that has been censored by the CIA. So that's the first thing to remember. And if that is the redacted version, we can only imagine what is in the full report, because it's absolutely horrific. And
so how does it relate to David?
Well, it relates to David and two other Australians who were detained and held in CIA custody. So we've got Mamdouh Habib and Jack Thomas as well. You know, it's really important to remember that Australia is involved in all of this. Australia is one of the 154 countries named as involved in the CIA rendition program, and the information has been to come out has been very sparse about that. I've had to take legal action in the US. I'm suing 5 US government agencies at the moment to try and get more information, because the Australian government has been so quiet about its involvement. The Prime Minister's office in particular has blocked my Freedom of Information request, so I've got 11 cases now before the Information Commissioner around issues relating to the war on terror and torture, because there has not been an independent investigation.
David, you're waiting on a decision now on your appeal to have your conviction vacated. How confident are you?
I'm confident because my legal team is confident. I'm not really sure where it's up to at the moment, or how much I can really say about it.
Aloysia?
Oh, well, at the end of the day, there was no crime. And, you know, it was a made-up system in an internationally condemned military commissions process. You know, it allows evidence obtained under torture, and everyone condemned that system, and now they've had to replace it with a 2009 Military Commissions Act, and President Obama himself called the system fatally flawed. So I'm 100% confident that this case will be resolved.
All right. David, Aloysia, thanks very much for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Coming up on Weekend Sunrise, how an Adelaide woman became a global online star without even knowing it. She'll join us to explain her popularity.
Straight ahead, though, the man spending a year doing good deeds, why it made him unpopular with some people. Come on.